The sleek glass studios of Sirius XM Radio in Manhattan buzzed with an unusual energy on this particular Tuesday afternoon in November 2023. The Generations in Music podcast, hosted by veteran music journalist Marcus Chen, had arranged what was being billed as a groundbreaking intergenerational conversation between two artists separated by nearly 6 decades of age and completely different musical worlds. On one side of the soundproof booth sat Ozzy Osbourne, 74 years old, and still the undisputed Prince of Darkness, promoting his latest and supposedly final album. On the other side sat 17-year-old Phoenix Rivera, a rising star in the hip-hop world, whose debut mixtape had just gone platinum and whose TikTok videos regularly garnered millions of views. The premise seemed simple enough: bring together representatives of two different musical generations to discuss how the industry had changed, what remained constant about artistic expression, and how different genres could learn from each other. Marcus had conducted hundreds of these types of interviews over his 20-year career, and he expected the usual polite exchange of compliments and observations about musical evolution. What he didn't anticipate was that Phoenix Rivera, born Jaden Washington in Compton, California, had grown up idolizing not just modern rap artists, but also studying the rebellious spirit and boundary-pushing artistry of rock legends. Nor did he expect that this seemingly innocent 17-year-old would come prepared to challenge one of music's most legendary figures in ways that would fundamentally shift both their perspectives on art, authenticity, and the responsibility that comes with influence. If you're enjoying this incredible generational clash story, please subscribe to our channel and hit that like button. It helps us bring you more amazing moments from music history. So we're here with two artists who represent very different eras and styles of music. Marcus began, adjusting his headphones as he looked between his guests. Ozzy, you've been making music for over 50 years, while Phoenix, you're just getting started at 17. What do you think you can learn from each other? Ozzy, looking remarkably sharp in a black suit with his signature cross necklace glinting under the studio lights, smiled warmly at the young rapper. Well, I'm always interested in hearing what the younger generation is doing with music. Hip-hop wasn't even around when I started, so I'm curious about how Phoenix approaches songwriting and connecting with his audience. Phoenix, dressed in designer streetwear but carrying himself with surprising poise for someone his age, nodded respectfully. Mr. Osbourne, I have to say I've studied your work extensively. Black Sabbath basically invented heavy metal, and your solo career showed how an artist can reinvent themselves while staying true to their core message. That's something every young artist should understand. That's very kind of you to say, Ozzy replied, clearly pleased by the respectful tone. I appreciate young artists who take the time to understand music history. Actually, Phoenix continued, his voice taking on a slightly more serious tone, that's something I wanted to talk to you about. See, I've been listening to your music for years, reading interviews, watching documentaries, and I have to ask you something that's been bothering me. Marcus leaned forward, sensing the conversation was about to take an unexpected turn. Ozzy raised an eyebrow, intrigued. Go ahead, son. What's on your mind? Phoenix took a deep breath, clearly gathering his courage. Mr. Osbourne, you talk a lot about authenticity and rebellion, about speaking truth to power and representing the outcasts. But I've been thinking, and please don't take this the wrong way, but hasn't your message kind of lost its edge over the years? The studio fell silent for a moment. Marcus's eyes widened, and even the sound engineer looked up from his board. How do you mean? Ozzy asked, his tone still friendly but with a hint of wariness. Well, Phoenix continued, his confidence growing. When you started out with Black Sabbath, you were genuinely dangerous to the establishment. You were 4 working-class kids from Birmingham, singing about war, poverty, and social injustice. The powerful people in society were actually threatened by what you represented. Ozzy nodded. Slowly. That's true. We caught a lot of hell from the authorities back then. Exactly. Phoenix's eyes lit up with passion. But now, and again, no disrespect, you're worth hundreds of millions of dollars. You live in a mansion in Beverly Hills. You've had a reality TV show on MTV. You're part of the establishment now. So when you sing those same rebellious songs, doesn't it feel a little, I don't know, hollow? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Marcus found himself holding his breath, unsure how the legendary rocker would respond to such a direct confrontation from someone young enough to be his great-grandson. Ozzy was quiet for a long moment, his expression unreadable. When he finally spoke, his voice was thoughtful rather than defensive. That's actually a really good question, Phoenix, and it's not the first time I've thought about it. But here's what I'm really getting at, Phoenix pressed on, clearly not satisfied with a simple acknowledgement. I look at hip-hop today, and I see the same thing happening. Artists who came from nothing, who started out speaking truth about struggle and injustice, and then they get successful and start rapping about expensive cars and designer clothes, instead of the problems that are still affecting their communities. He leaned forward in his chair, his young face intense with conviction. So my question is, how do you stay authentic when success changes everything about your life? How do you keep speaking for the outcasts when you're not an outcast anymore? Because right now, at 17, I'm getting offers for endorsement deals and luxury brand partnerships, and I can already feel the pressure to change my message to something more comfortable for mainstream audiences. Ozzy stared at the young rapper for several seconds, clearly processing not just the question, but the intelligence and insight behind it. This wasn't the typical softball interview he had expected. You know what, Phoenix? Ozzy finally said, his Birmingham accent becoming more pronounced, as it always did when he was deeply engaged. You've just asked me the most important question anyone's asked me in years, and I'm not sure I have a good answer. Marcus realized he was witnessing something extraordinary, a moment of genuine vulnerability from one of rock's most legendary figures. But let me try, Ozzy continued, his voice growing stronger. You're absolutely right that success changes everything. When I was young and poor and angry, it was easy to rail against the system because the system was actively working against me. Now, I am the system in many ways. He paused, gathering his thoughts. But here's what I've learned over 50 years of doing this. Authenticity isn't about your circumstances. It's about your intent. The question isn't whether you're still poor or struggling. The question is whether you're still connected to that struggle, whether you still care about the people who are going through what you went through. Phoenix nodded, clearly engaged, but not entirely convinced. I mean, I get that, he said. But how do you maintain that connection when your daily reality is so different from the people you're supposedly speaking for? When was the last time you worried about paying rent or wondered where your next meal was coming from? The directness of the question was startling, but Ozzy didn't seem offended. Instead, he looked almost grateful for the challenge. You're right. I haven't worried about those things in decades, he admitted, but I remember them. More importantly, I use the platform that success has given me to try to help people who are still facing those struggles. Like how? Phoenix asked, his tone genuinely curious rather than confrontational. Well, for one thing, I've donated millions to addiction recovery programs because I know what it's like to be trapped by substances and feel like there's no way out. I support mental health organizations because I've battled depression and anxiety my whole life. I fund music education programs in working class areas because I know how much music saved my life when I was a kid with no other options. Ozzy's voice was gaining passion now. But more than that, Phoenix, I try to remember that my job isn't to stay poor and angry forever. My job is to use whatever success I've achieved to amplify the voices of people who are still fighting those battles. Phoenix considered this for a moment. Okay, I can respect that. But don't you think there's a danger in speaking for people instead of with them? Like, isn't there something a little, I don't know, paternalistic about a millionaire rock star telling working-class kids that he understands their struggle? The question was so sharp, so insightful, that even Marcus found himself leaning forward to hear Ozzy's response. Christ, you're smart, Ozzy said, laughing despite himself. How old did you say you were? 17, Phoenix replied with a slight smile. But I've been thinking about these questions since I was 12 and realized that the rappers I looked up to weren't rapping about the neighborhood I lived in anymore. Fair enough, Ozzy said, and you're absolutely right to question that. Maybe the answer isn't that I should keep singing the same songs about the same struggles. Maybe the answer is that I should find new ways to be authentic to who I am now, while still honoring where I came from. What does that look like, though? Phoenix asked. Ozzy was quiet for a long moment, clearly wrestling with the question in real time. I think, he said slowly, it means being honest about the journey Not pretending I'm still the same angry kid from Birmingham, but not forgetting him either. It means using my platform to lift up new voices, like yours, that are speaking to experiences I can't speak to anymore. He looked directly at Phoenix. And it means listening to challenges like the one you're giving me right now, even when they're uncomfortable. Especially when they're uncomfortable. Phoenix nodded appreciatively. I can respect that, but I have another question for you. I'm starting to think you have questions I haven't even thought of yet, Ozzy replied with genuine amusement. What advice would you give to someone my age who's trying to navigate this whole authenticity thing from the beginning? Because I'm already seeing how success changes people's expectations of what I should rap about. People want me to talk about money and fame now, not about growing up in Compton or watching my friends get caught up in gang violence. The question seemed to hit Ozzy deeply. He was quiet for nearly a minute before responding. That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? He finally said. Because I made a lot of mistakes when I was starting out. I let other people's expectations of who I should be overshadow who I actually was. How so? Well, early on, people expected me to be this wild, dangerous character all the time. So I became that character, even when it was destroying my life and hurting the people I loved. I thought that's what authenticity meant, being consistent with people's image of you. Ozzy's voice became more serious. But real authenticity means being true to your own values and experiences, not to other people's expectations. It means being willing to disappoint people if staying true to yourself requires it. But what if staying true to yourself means talking about things that don't sell as well? Phoenix asked. What if the real stuff, the struggles, the social issues, the complexity of growing up in difficult circumstances, what if that's not what the market wants? Then you find a way to make the market want it, Ozzy replied firmly. You make it so compelling, so honest, so undeniably real that people can't ignore it. That's what we did with Black Sabbath. We made music that was so authentic to our experience that it created its own audience. Phoenix's eyes lit up. So you're saying the key is to be so authentically yourself that you create demand for that authenticity? Exactly, Ozzy exclaimed, clearly energized by the young rapper's understanding. Don't chase what's popular. Make what's true to you so powerful that it becomes popular. But what about when that authentic message evolves? Phoenix pressed. Like, what happens when I'm not 17 anymore? When I'm not living in the same circumstances? How do I avoid becoming one of those artists who loses connection with their original message? Ozzy leaned back in his chair, clearly impressed by the depth of Phoenix's thinking. You know what? I think you're already on the right track just by asking these questions. Most artists don't think about this stuff until it's too late. What do you mean? I mean, most of us just react to success without really thinking about how to handle it authentically. We either try to stay exactly the same, which is impossible and fake, or we completely abandon who we were, which is also fake. Ozzy's voice grew more passionate. But you're thinking about this deliberately. You're asking how to grow and change while staying true to your core values. That's wisdom way beyond your years. I had good teachers, Phoenix said quietly. My grandmother always told me that success is a test, not a reward. She said the real challenge isn't getting successful, it's staying yourself once you get there. Your grandmother sounds like a smart woman, Ozzy replied. Maybe that's the answer right there. Remember that success is a test. Keep asking yourself, am I using this platform to serve something bigger than myself, or am I just serving my own ego? Phoenix nodded thoughtfully. That's deep. But let me ask you this. Looking back, do you think you passed that test? The question was so direct, so unflinching, that Marcus found himself holding his breath again. Ozzy was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was soft but honest. Not always, he admitted. There were years when I definitely failed that test, when I was so caught up in the lifestyle and the image that I lost sight of why I started making music in the first place. What brought you back? Pain, Ozzy said simply. My own pain, and seeing the pain I was causing other people. Rock bottom has a way of reminding you what really matters. And what really matters? Connection, Ozzy replied without hesitation. The feeling that your art is genuinely helping people feel less alone in the world. Everything else, the money, the fame, the lifestyle, that's all just noise. Phoenix leaned forward, clearly moved by this honest admission. Mr. Osbourne, can I tell you something? Of course. This conversation has been more valuable to me than any business meeting I've had since I got signed. You've given me a framework for thinking about success that I didn't have before. Ozzy smiled warmly. And you've reminded me of questions I should still be asking myself. Thank you for challenging me. Most people my age just want to tell me how great I am. Well, you are great, Phoenix said with a grin. But that doesn't mean you should stop growing. Marcus finally found his voice. I have to say, I've been doing this for 20 years, and I've never heard a conversation quite like this one. Phoenix, where did this depth of thinking come from? Phoenix shrugged. I guess I've always been aware that I'm part of a tradition. Hip-hop comes from struggle and resistance, just like rock does. I feel responsible to that tradition, you know? I want to make sure I honor it, while also pushing it forward. And how do you plan to do that? Ozzy asked, clearly genuinely interested in the young artist's vision. By never letting success make me comfortable with injustice, Phoenix replied. By always remembering that my platform comes with responsibility, and by surrounding myself with people who will challenge me the way I just challenged you. Ozzy laughed. You just gave me an idea. What if we did something together? Like what? I don't know yet, but I think there's something powerful about bringing together different generations and different genres around shared values. Maybe we could create something that shows how authenticity and resistance can evolve and adapt while staying true to their core. Phoenix's eyes widened with excitement. That would be incredible, but only if we can do it in a way that feels genuine, not like some kind of publicity stunt. Agreed, Ozzy said. It has to mean something real. The interview continued for another 30 minutes, with both artists diving deeper into questions of artistic responsibility, the relationship between success and authenticity, and the role of music in social change. By the end, what had started as a standard promotional interview had become something resembling a masterclass in musical philosophy. As they removed their headphones, Phoenix turned to Ozzy with a thoughtful expression. Mr. Osbourne, can I ask you one more thing? Shoot. Do you ever worry that you've said everything you have to say? Like that you've reached the limit of what you can contribute to music? Ozzy considered the question seriously. You know, I did worry about that for a while, but this conversation has reminded me that maybe the most important thing I can contribute now isn't new songs. It's helping young artists like you think through these big questions. Maybe my role now is to be a sounding board for the next generation. I'd like that, Phoenix said. I think every young artist needs someone who's been through the whole journey to help them navigate it. When the podcast episode was released 2 weeks later, it immediately went viral across multiple platforms. Clips of their conversation were shared millions of times, with particular focus on Phoenix's challenging questions and Ozzy's honest, vulnerable responses. The reaction was overwhelmingly positive, with fans from both hip-hop and rock communities praising the depth and authenticity of their exchange. Music critics called it a masterclass in intergenerational dialogue and proof that real artistry transcends genre boundaries. More importantly, the conversation sparked broader discussions about authenticity, success, and responsibility in the music industry. Several established artists credited the interview with making them reconsider their own approaches to their careers and their messages. 6 months later, Ozzy and Phoenix announced a collaborative project, not a song, but a mentorship program pairing established artists with young musicians to discuss the challenges of maintaining artistic integrity throughout their careers. That interview changed both of us, Phoenix said at the program's launch event. It reminded me that the questions are as important as the answers, and that every generation of artists has something to teach the others. And it reminded me, Ozzy added, that staying authentic isn't something you achieve once and then you're done. It's something you have to choose every day, with every decision you make about your art and your career. The program became a model for the industry, showing how meaningful dialogue between generations could benefit everyone involved. And at its heart was the lesson that Phoenix had taught Ozzy that day in the studio, that the most important authenticity isn't being true to who you were, but being honest about who you're becoming. Thank you for reading this incredible story of generational wisdom and challenging conversations. If it moved you, please subscribe to our channel and hit the like button. It helps us continue sharing stories that remind us of the power of honest dialogue and the importance of questioning ourselves and each other as we grow.